You know that the world and our work is changing. But as humans, we aren't changing as fast as our situation. So today we're going to look at how we can adapt more effectively through the lens of behavioral science. I'm super excited to have our guest with us today. It's going to be a powerful and insightful journey. And so welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively and make a bigger difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you're listening to this podcast, you could be live with us for future episodes on your favorite social channel. You can get access to that information ahead of time and get it on your calendar, and therefore hear these great conversations sooner by joining our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn. Today's episode is brought to you by Remarkable Development Sessions. A Remarkable Development Session is a webinar for a new world. We know that we learn in interaction with others, but in a fractured, increasingly virtual world, the workshop experience has been shifted to a focus on delivering the content and leaving the application to you as an individual. And we think we need to change that. So even if you love learning from webinars, you've likely thought there has to be a better way. And we believe we found the way to get webinars to be more effective than they've ever been. If you'd like to learn more about what we're doing, how we're doing it, and the sessions that we have coming up, then go to kevineikenberry.com/remarkable development to learn more and register for an upcoming session on a valuable skill. And so with that, I probably should bring in our guest. Here she is. I see that we've gotten some comments. Let me get through my introduction of Gabriella Rosen Kellerman, and then I will get to those. So joining us today is Gabriella Rosen Kellerman, MD. She's served as a Chief Product Officer and Chief Innovation Officer at Better Up, the head of Better Up Labs, the founding CEO of LifeLink, and an advisor to healthcare, coaching, and behavioral change technology companies. Trained in psychiatry and fMRI research, she holds an MD with honors from the Mount Sinai School of Medicine and a BA summa cum laude from Harvard. You know what this means, everybody? She's really smart. Her work has been published and featured in The Atlantic, Harvard Business Review, Inc., Forbes, and many more. Her first book is one of the reasons why she's here. It's called Tomorrowmind, and I'm so glad to have you here. Gabriella, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much, Kevin. It's wonderful to be with you.
Well, let's see what we've got here. We've got people from Missouri and North Carolina and New York and Pennsylvania. Hello, Keith. And from Michigan and from St. Thomas, Ontario, Canada, at least. So that also tells you, everybody, that if you haven't weighed in, you want to say hello, please do that. So Gabriella, I am excited to talk to you. And when I held this up, people might have seen there's a whole lot of little pink, purple things over here on the side. We're not going to get to all of those things, but I really want to dive in to the book and the ideas that I promised in the open. But before we do that, I really want to know sort of what led you to doing this work. Like what gets you to this place and this brand new book?
Great. So big picture, I have always, since I was an adolescent, wanted to help improve well-being and help elevate the standard experience of living that we have. It puzzles me and to a certain extent troubles me that we live longer than we ever had. We have a higher standard of living in certain exterior ways, and yet fundamentally our lived experience is not different and it contains just about the same amount of suffering as it did when we first evolved. So that general problem space has always been fascinating to me. And as I got older and started to understand that work is the place where as adults we are spending the majority of our waking hours on this planet, that as a focus for where we can thrive and where we can really achieve our dreams came into clarity for me. And that's the high level answer to your question. It still motivates me and fuels me to this day.
So I want to ask a question, and I don't mean to ask it in any sort of contentious way. So I don't want it to be heard by
It's a great wind up. I'm already excited.
anywhere else. But you talk about it, and lots of people talk. Most of us talk about the fact that things are changing faster than ever. And so my question is, is it really changing faster than ever? And again, I'm not asking that because I necessarily disagree, but do you have any thoughts about that? And maybe
Yeah.
even in what ways that's happening?
Yeah, so part of the work that Marty and I have done is looking at previous labor transformations to understand, is it actually faster today than, for example, in the Industrial Revolution? And we do have data. So we have data showing that the pace of job displacement today is somewhere between 2 to 4 times as fast as it was at the end of the Industrial Revolution. And the end, you might think the end is sort of when it slows down, but it's actually not. The end, meaning the last 40 years, the Industrial Revolution, that's when cities had the infrastructure to bring people in quickly. You had the most factories up and running. So we're comparing the beginning of our transition, the first 20 years or so, to the end, and in some ways the peak of that. The pace is already 2 to 4 times as fast in terms of the changing rate of jobs either going away or us entering into new ones.
So, okay, so that's sort of looking at it in sort of an economic way, if you
Mhm.
will. Uh, in from your perspective in the work that you're doing, in what ways is work changing today? And there's some obvious ones in the post-pandemic world, but are there any specific things that you think maybe are worth us noting as we dive into this conversation about how we can better adapt to all of it?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't think that this is earth-shattering, but I think it's helpful to think about two dimensions of change. So there's the pace, which we just talked about. Another way to think about the pace is simply how fast is the change that I personally am going to experience, and depending on the estimates, it's actually changing not just roles, but even careers, possibly every 10 years. That's radically different from anything we've experienced in the past. So there's the pace component, and then there's the nature of change. And 50 years ago, military theorists coined this term VUCA: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. That helps get at what is the very unusual nature of change. The changes that are coming to us are novel, right? It's not something we've seen before necessarily. Think about the pandemic, for example, brand new type of change for all of us to experience. It's not clear when it hits, what it's going to mean. It evolves as it unfurls. So it's not the same on day one of a change as it is on day 90. And lots of things happen in between that affect how it's going to play out. All of that's very unnatural, and it's easy for us to get kind of in that limbic system place of fear in the face of that type of change, let alone couple that now with the pace.
So as you said, we sort of all know that at some level, but I love the fact that you can lay those two things side by side, pace as well as the nature of the change. And so while all that's changing a lot, even almost in some ways before our eyes, human nature isn't changing that much, certainly not nearly that fast. And so I think that's really the underpinning of the book and this really wonderful idea or word of tomorrow mind. So you are proposing to us, if I can make an opening statement, you're proposing to us that there are five things that we could be doing, five components that can help us adapt to all of this more effectively so that we can thrive at work, which, by the way, is the title at the front of the book. It says thriving at work now and in an uncertain future. And I have to say that when I got this, before I opened it up, I was already predisposed to say yes to the book because you use that word thrive, because that's what we ought to be going for, right? It's a higher bar than just sort of surviving. So five components, if you will, and we'll dive into some of them. I got to tell all of you before we go any further that a little inside baseball. So we get lots of books. I was gone for 4 days last week. I got 5 books in the mail, some of which we asked for, some of which we didn't. And not all of those will end up being people that we have on here. Some of them, they're not a great fit for our show, and not necessarily there's anything wrong with the books. But sometimes, so I would say that every one that's here are books that I personally think that you ought to read or be interested in. This one, I will tell you now, I believe will be one of my favorites for the year. And this is January the 23rd as we're having this conversation. So with that high praise, Gabriella, tell us about the five components that we're going to dive into a little bit.
Thank you so much for the praise, Kevin. That's really kind and means a lot, makes it feel like the effort is worthwhile. So we have an acronym PRISM. They're the 5 components of a Tomorrowmind. All of these can be developed, and many of them were core to the very first work that we did, which was hunting and gathering. And that's the work our brains are natively ready to do. And so some of this work should sort of feel like a return to some of those components we've strayed from. So that acronym again is PRISM. P is for prospection, which is imagining and planning for the future. R is for resilience and cognitive agility, which is the bedrock of how we thrive through change. I is innovation and creativity. That fell out of use in the industrial era in many ways. And now it's again a critical workplace skill, just as it was as a hunter gatherer. S is social support, and our angle on that is rapid rapport, which is how do you quickly build trust across difference, knowing we still need that support as much as ever, but there are all of these dimensions of work today that make it harder to access. And then M is mattering, which is a kind of a more concrete, actionable take on the idea of meaning and purpose at work.
All right. So there you can see I was prepared with all 5 of those,
It's
and we're going to talk
beautiful.
about some of them more than others. And the only reason we're going to talk about some of them more than others is because we only have so much time, and I made some choices. And I'm going to start with prospection, because that's, I mean, people have heard the other words. They may not have heard this word before. So let's start here. I think this is a really important piece, and something that you're bringing to the conversation that a lot of people haven't really heard. So let's start here. What do you really mean by this? And let's talk about it a little bit.
Great. So, our ability to imagine the future and then plan for it, the depth at which we can do that is unique to our species. Um, it has 2 phases. So, the first phase is pretty fast, optimistic, and divergent. If you said, well, what's going to come next in my career? The first few seconds or maybe minute of thinking would be kind of excited, optimistic, expansive. And then very quickly we go into phase 2, which is much more deliberate, deliberative. It's much more evaluative. It can tend toward the pessimistic. And now we're sort of weighing those options and getting into the practicality of it. And so there are a number of errors that we can make as prospectors. Some of them are consistent across all of us, which are what we'd call cognitive biases, and some of them are unique to each of us. And we've been studying this at Better Up Labs for almost 5 years now and have developed a lot of science around how to build these skills. And part of the idea of writing the book is to get this out there into the world so as many people as possible can understand what this is, why it's so important, and how to develop it.
So but I should have said this before to everyone. And I want to say it now, because I'd like for all of you to sort of listen to the rest of this with 2 hats on. Certainly, thinking about this for yourself, and how good am I at imagining a future and planning for it, prospection, but also how we can help our teams, how we can help others, whether it's coaching an individual, working with our team, and how we can bring some of these to bear in our organization, I think, as well. So feel free, if you're here with us live, to ask questions about from either lens, with either frame. And Gabriella, feel free to sort of answer in either sort of way that you want as we go. What's something that we can do to be more effective at doing this well?
Great. So I'll say one thing for each phase as an example. And before I do that, I just want to piggyback on your comment about the leadership lens. Leaders of teams who are more prospective, better at prospecting themselves, have more successful teams. And so we have tons of data to bear this out. One of the things that those leaders spend more time doing than others is actually planning. So it's in that second phase. Um, and in that second phase, one of the errors that we make is we underestimate or don't think ahead enough about the different obstacles that could come our way. And doing that allows us to then work backwards into what we might need to be doing differently today, to get ahead of it. So it's both about planning for a specific future and then positioning us to be in good shape for a wider array of futures. And leaders who spend more time thinking about how to get ahead of obstacles for that wider array are going to have a team that's more agile in terms of ability to respond. Um, that's sort of a phase two prospection tip, is structured thinking about obstacles and how to overcome those obstacles. On the first phase, the related task that's important that often gets short shrift is thinking divergently and expansively enough about what those futures could be. And there are different exercises that help us with this. There's an organization level exercise called scenario planning, which is many may be familiar with. And the idea there is you really, as a collective, push yourselves to think about these very divergent futures. And then what happens is it's not about predicting a specific future. We're not here to sort of fortune tell, but we are here to, again, position ourselves in an agile manner around lots of things that could come, by thinking ahead to these divergent futures. What it allows people to do at the company level, and you can do it at the individual and team level, is then start to enter the second phase with a wider array of outcomes that you're preparing for and planning for, a wider array then of obstacles, again, that you're thinking ahead of and getting ahead of. And you're now in a much more agile position versus being kind of stuck and fragile and brittle when change starts to come, because not only have you not thought about that specific change, but you haven't thought about anything adjacent to it. You haven't generally thought about what it's going to take to shift the team over in general.
Um, y- you just said something, and there's something in the book that I want to talk about, and you actually talk about it in a different one of the components, of one of the prism components. But something you just said is connected. And you just said, leaders, we need to be taking the time to do a better job of planning. And so most of us would nod our head and say, yeah, but I don't have any more of that. Gabriella, you talk about something called time famine and time affluence in another place in the book. So talk about that mindset difference, and then we'll move back. We'll move into that component after that. How about that?
Great. So, yeah, this sense of time famine, I don't have enough time in the day. Um, how could I do one more thing? It has a negative impact on all kinds of capabilities, all kinds of ways that we show up at work. It's very reasonable that we feel that way. We're being asked to do a lot. Many of us are balancing obligations outside of work with work obligations. But we should know that it's not necessarily a new phenomenon that we feel like we're in a hurry. It's new compared to probably how our hunter gatherer ancestors felt, but it's not new. And they had a 5-hour work day, or, whatever it is that we think. But it's not new for, for our era, our parents' era, et cetera. Um, it is a mindset. So the first thing to recognize is that it's a way of thinking about our day and our time, and that there are ways to combat that mindset. Um, some of it is sort of objectively looking at, okay, well, how are we spending that time? If we're spending a lot of time surfing the web or in leisure activities like social media or entertainment, which are all, leisure is important. Some forms of leisure are probably better for us than others, of course, but that is free time. Chatting with friends on messaging, that's free time. So let's just be honest and realistic about time that gets wasted during the day. Um, the other thing, though, is we know that certain types of activities help reverse that sense of time famine and get us into a place of what's called time affluence, where we feel more of a sense of, I do have time for things. I'm a little bit more at ease. Like, sure, there might be things I'm not going to get to today, but that's okay. I'm doing a good job on the things that I'm doing. And one of those things is actually helping others. So, a lot of the research on time famine comes from people studying connection, because it turns out that this sense of I don't have enough time leads us into all kinds of antisocial behaviors. We don't help people as much as we otherwise would. We certainly don't spend the time to connect with them as much as we otherwise would. And ironically, when we take time to help others, it gets us more into this sense of actually I have a little bit more time in my day. The act of giving time to others shifts us into a different mindset. There's a beautiful paper by a trio of professors from Wharton, Yale, and Harvard, and the title of that is Giving Time Gives Us Time.
Yeah, and you talk about it in the book, which is awesome. We are talking with Gabriella Rosen Kellerman, author of the brand new book Tomorrowmind. You need to go get this. This is the one. This is what they call an advanced copy. So I don't even have an official copy like you all
Mhm.
can get when you order yours. So, Gabriella, one of the things in our work around helping teams who are working remotely and all that kind of thing, and we've talked a lot about the psychology of where you're working, the environment around you has an impact on how you view your work. And when we're in a space where we don't have any clues about where we work and who we work with, and there's no monitors with metrics on the walls in the conference rooms and all those sorts of things, that we end up focusing ourselves more on our work and less on something broader, which has a big impact on what you just said, because then people are feeling even more like I'm on my own, which takes us in more likely into this time famine space. So the S in Prism is social support, but your take on this is this idea of rapid rapport. But before we get, I was thought I'd find it quickly, but I'm not going to find it quickly. Before we get to talk about rapid rapport, I need you to tell us what rapport really means, because that's one of those
Mm.
words we throw around, and I think your definition is helpful.
Oh yeah, thanks for asking. So, it is a close state of connection that's sustained over multiple interactions. Empathy, compassion; those are things you can get to in a single interaction. Rapport is typically over different interactions, and it sustains from one to the next. So it sort of builds over time, and that's a kind of efficiency for us at work where we're not rebuilding rapport each time we interact. We kind of get to that state with each other.
So the million dollar question: if you are a part of a remote or hybrid team, or if you are leading a remote or hybrid team, what are some pieces of advice that can help us do this more rapidly, or make it sustainable when we don't have the the water cooler this down the hall, the popping into the cubicle opening,
Yeah.
etc.
Yeah, it's such an important problem. So, there are three major barriers to building rapport in our modern world of work. The first is time, which we just talked about. It's the sense of I don't have enough time. The second is space. So, we're not physically together in the same way. There's, less in person time. Some of us are geographically on opposite sides of the world. And the third is us them, which is not novel for this decade, but probably novel for this sort of 100 years. The people that we work with are very different from us in all kinds of ways, right? And, we talk about a lot of demographic differences under the DEIB umbrella, which is a big part of that, but also functionally, sales versus marketing, or there's a merger and, it's us versus them in terms of our company and the newcomers. And so the idea that we're effectively working with strangers, but we have to build rapport across all this difference is the third barrier. So in the book, we talk about ways of overcoming each of those. And on the first one, in terms of time, we talked a bit about this idea of first educating oneself that you will feel a greater sense of time if you do connect with people. We also include an overview of all of this beautiful work that's done in healthcare to help doctors to show them that it can be even 10 seconds of kind words to another human being can help connect you, can help them feel a greater sense of trust in you, and it builds from there. So we can all find 10 seconds. We can all find 40 seconds. We can all probably find a minute in each interaction to just devote to acts of compassion and connection, and it has an impact. On the space side, there's a lot to say there, but the short version is that the more we can spend our time together synchronously, so shared conversation versus asynchronous messaging or emails or social media, the deeper that connection can be, even when we're not together in person. Shared time, shared experiences really matter. And then the third one on us them is, it starts with recognizing that our brains are wired to say each person that we meet, are they an us or a them? And most of the people we're going to meet at work, perhaps all the people we meet at work, are a them to begin with. And we need to then figure out how to rewire our brains to see them as an us. And there's lots of tips and tricks to get there. Um, there's also some really great research that we're proud to have done at Better At on when you inadvertently exclude someone in the workplace setting, how do you reverse that? Where we know that there's a causal relationship between someone feeling they don't belong, someone feeling excluded, and them not feeling connected to the team and not working for the team, right? Even at their own expense. And so as
Often
leaders
at
and
their own expense, right?
organizations,
Yep.
we want to reverse that. So tips like individuation, recategorization, perspective taking, these are all exercises and interventions we go through in the book to help overcome that us them challenge.
So you don't know this, Gabriella, but earlier this year, I identified and have been talking about 5 skills that as leaders we especially need to be working on this year. And one of them is that we as leaders must recognize that we are meaning makers. And so
Mhm.
one of the prism points is meaning and mattering. And you when you introduced it, you talked more about the word mattering, and that's where the chapter ends up. So I want you to talk. I think we all at some level know what meaning means, certainly in the workplace. And while we could spend time there in the limited time we have left, I'd like you to talk about what you mean by mattering. Describe what that is, and maybe how that's a little more tangible and easier for some of us to get our arms around.
Yeah, absolutely. So meaning and purpose at work is, a buzzword probably last 20 years or so. It's something we've studied a lot at Better At. One of the challenges that comes up is that people feel like meaning can be such a personal thing. And really, what business does a leader have or an organization have trying to influence your sense of meaning? So we get a challenge like I get a challenge like that in every talk I do on this topic. Mattering really concretizes it. And it says, it builds on the work of Rebecca Goldstein, who we're proud to have worked with directly, to say mattering is something that fundamentally, if we don't feel we matter, we're in a really bad place psychologically. It's really critical to our well being to feel that we matter. And every leader should be able to help their team understand why their individual labors matter. So it is a very concrete kind of subset of meaning that's easier to measure, it's easier to influence, and it's a little easier for a broader base of leaders and organizations to wrap their head around why that's something they owe to their employees to have them understand why their work matters. Even when they have to change what they're working on, especially when they have to change what they're working on, the pace of change, the way we pivot so quickly today really threatens our sense of mattering. To have to give up a project you were working on for 6 weeks and suddenly you're onto something totally new. Why did I spend 6 weeks on that? Right? That's the question
Right.
we're all getting as leaders, and we all need to be able to answer compellingly and meaningfully.
Uh, I knew this would happen, that we wouldn't really have time to even at a high level talk about all 5 of the prism factors. We haven't really talked about resilience. We certainly haven't talked about creativity and innovation. And it's not because they aren't important. Um, and right, what I want to do, Gabrielle, before we go, because one of the things you said to me before we started is most of the conversations you've had so far have been about the book, have been about the personal side of it. So I guess before we go into the final set of questions I want to ask you, is there something else beyond what we've talked about that you want to tell us as leaders about Tomorrow Mind, about what we ought to be doing with some of what you all have learned?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. So, the leaders of the teams have a tremendous influence on these 5 capabilities for the members of their team, both by modeling it. So, for example, with resilience, resilient leaders naturally just have more resilient teams. The teams see it, they feel it. So, just by yourself working on your resilience as a leader, it's going to influence your team. And by helping to instill it, for example, with mattering, which we just talked about, creativity, leaders have a tremendous influence on the creative output of their teams by the ways they're interacting with their reports. Um, and through the lens of organizational success, that should matter to us. Also, as humanists who care about the well-being of the people on our team and the success on our team, that should matter too. So for me, this makes me optimistic because I think we're in an era where leaders care a lot about the broader success of their team, success beyond success, as they say. And this is a way to invest in ourselves and also generate great productivity for our team. I also think in some ways it's the only way, right? The older idea that we could sort of in the industrial era train people in a classroom and then send them out for their careers and they're ready. That's just not how it is anymore. Every day there's new challenges we're all facing that even our direct manager doesn't know about, maybe for several days or even weeks.
Right.
We've got to be ready. And so the manager and the leader's job is really coaching to these much deeper meta skills rather than training us in hard skills that are going to expire quickly and not going to serve us well when something radically different happens at work the following day.
I love that. Okay. So I'm shifting gears now. Outside of all this fascinating work and the effort that goes into writing a book and now promoting a book, like, what do you do for fun, Gabriella?
Oh, thanks for asking. Well, at the moment, my greatest source of joy is my youngest are twins who turn 1, and I've never experienced anything like playing with 2 babies at one time. It is the most fun and special thing to see them together. So that is a great source of joy and fun for me. I do like to exercise. I spend a lot of time with my close friends. And we enjoy getting out there and trying new foods. We're foodies, traveling. Yeah, lots of things.
Cool. And one of the things I know, the only thing you knew I was going to ask you is the next question. And that is, so what are you reading right now or these days? I know you have it in front of you.
I happen to have it right here. So I am reading, let's see, how do I get this here? It's a book of essays by Ann Patchett, who's a beautiful fiction writer, called These Precious Days. It was given to me as a present by one of my best friends. And I tend to read a lot of nonfiction. The essays are creative nonfiction, but a little bit closer to the fiction side than I typically go. As I'm taking a break from the act of researching and writing Tomorrowmind, I'm slipping into more of a fiction creative mindset and really enjoying that at the moment.
Perfect. And now the question you most want me to ask, like, where can people learn more? Where can they get the book? Like, where do you want to point people? How do you connect with you? Where do you want to point people?
Oh, thanks so much. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or on Instagram. Where can you learn more? So if you want to learn more about BetterUp, go to betterup.com. If you want to learn more about Tomorrowmind, there's a Simon and Schuster page. There is an Amazon page. And then I have lots of links on my website as well, which is just GabriellaRosenKellerman.com.
And there it is. If you're watching, you can see it. Again, GabriellaRosenKellerman.com. And buy the book, wherever fine books are sold, as they used to say. So now, before we go, and before I let Gabriella go, I have a question for all of you. And if you've been, with me before, you know what I'm going to ask you. And the question I'm going to ask you is, now what? What are you going to do with what you just learned? Maybe there's something that you learned about time famine or time affluence that you want to use. Maybe you learned something about just you want to apply something around this idea of these particular meta skills. Maybe you were inspired by the idea of how we can be better at prospection as a leader. Maybe what you want to spend some time on is how you can build real rapport with your team more rapidly. Whatever that might be for you, I encourage you to take some action, because if you don't take some action from this, what's the point, right? Hope that you'll do that. I hope you'll get a copy of this book. I really do hope you'll do that. And Gabriella, thank you so much.
Thank you so
It was
much,
such
Kevin.
a pleasure to visit with you today. I was looking forward to it, and I'm glad we had the chance to do it. All right, everybody. That means that's the end of another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, which simply means we'll be back again next week. Actually, in terms of lives, I'll be back twice more this week. And so wherever you're watching or listening, we hope that you'll continue to do so and invite others to join us. And next week, I'll see you again for another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Thanks, everybody.